This here is where Caesar and Marcus had their home. 2 kennels were built here on a really heavy concrete base built by the engineers. And when we arrived in Vietnam, it had already been built. And it was superbly, strongly built kennels. Both dogs jumped inside, they loved it. But the first day we got here, we went to our tent, which is just over down there among the trees, which is where our tent was. And then we came up here and got the dogs ready to go into their kennel. But they weren't so happy about going into the kennel. What they wanted to do was run around here and go mad and pee on every tree. They just thought this was fantastic. So the dogs, when we were in Nui Dat, not on operations, we were in Nui Dat, this is where they slept, in these kennels. And in the morning and at night, we took them out in the morning and we walked around here and we gave them necessary obedience, which is like drill. Come, say, sit, do what you're told. Then we would groom them, check them over, make sure they were in good nick, and then we were allowed to have a run. And then at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if we were in Nui Dat, I would pick up a bucket from the mess hall with chopped steak and meat, mix it with biscuits and lettuce, come up, and the bowls were in the kennels and we would feed them. And every time I was walking up through those trees with a bucket with the meat, Caesar would see through the arc mesh and would jump up on the side with his bowl in his mouth. Marcus was always lying down on his back with his legs in the air, lazy lab. Caesar was always alert and knew that the food was coming. Then we would feed them, bed them down for the night, then we'd go back to our tent. And our tent for the trackers was down there. There were hundreds of tents through here, hundreds and hundreds of tents through here. And that track road running through there was where the company sergeant major was, but all the way through there, right the way along those, were dozens, scores of tents. And that's where the infantry rifle companies were, in there. And the first battalion to come into here and establish it was the 6th Battalion that was involved in the Battle of Long Tan. When they were to be relieved, 2 Battalion came in, and I came in 2 weeks before the 6th Battalion went, settled the dogs down, acclimatised them before my battalion came, and I went over and I was talking to the Delta Company, the guys that had been in Long Tan, and they were based over there in those trees over there. And they were absolutely gobsmacked when they saw these 2 black Labradors walking up to them. But this is where the dogs actually lived. So they never went into the tents, did not sleep in the tents. They did in some cases. When these 2 dogs were taken over, they may have gone to another battalion, but 2 more dogs moved in, and eventually there were a total of 9 dogs were rotated through the system. That was their home, and it was cool and it was nice. And over to one side, we had a half-gallon drum, a 44-gallon drum cut in half, and we used to put a disinfectant and flea repellent in there in the water and would bathe them in that as well. The last day that I left, and on the morning that we left, I came up here to say goodbye to the dogs because we were going to leave them here. New guys were taking them over. And I came up and I didn't let him out. I put my hand through and just patted him, and I spoke to him. And I said, I've got to go and you've got to stay. And then I stepped back and he looked at me and I looked at him. And then I turned around and I walked straight away. And I heard him standing up and he had the bowl in his mouth and dropped it straight onto the concrete floor, and he realised it's gone. I went down there and had a big howl, and then Dennis came up and said the same thing to Marcus and then walked away. And we never saw them again. Not quite true in Dennis's case, another story. Well, I went back to Australia and 2 new handlers took over both dogs. And I came back to Vietnam 2 years later, and I was based over at 3 RAR, and I was a section commander, not a dog handler. And Caesar had been given away, donated away to Europeans in Saigon. Marcus was still working. And Dennis came back 2 years later, and Dennis was reunited with his dog 2 years after the war and handled him again for another 12 months. Incredible story.
Why had Caesar retired and not Marcus?
Oh, well, they were gradually pensioning the dogs off. And it depends what battalion Marcus was with and decided to keep him. He was still working, yeah. They shall grow not old as we live grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. In the morning we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
And I went deaf. My ears popped in. I lifted about 3 feet off the ground here. I went up and forward, and my rifle went straight into the sand, and I was on my face sucking dirt. And I couldn't hear everything. Everything was just singing, zing, 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 zing.